Good afternoon, and welcome to a fireside chat with Rear Admiral Thomas Henderschedt, Director for Intelligence, J2 Indo-Pacific Command. Before the program begins, a message from our sponsor.
The maritime environment is very different, and it makes it very difficult to understand what's going on everywhere all the time. You have to use everything that's available to you: electro-optical, infrared, other types of detection capability, and very importantly, radio frequency detection. Hawkeye 360 is at the leading edge, discovering, uncovering new use cases for this amazing commercial RF capability.
Now, please welcome INSA President Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our program. Today, INSA is pleased to host one of our nation's top military intelligence leaders. Before we begin our program, a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have questions, and we hope you do, please submit them through the question box on the right side of your screen. Feel free to include both your name and organization. We have over 650 registrants today, so please bear with me as I try to get through all of the questions. And we are also pleased to welcome members of the press to the program. A reminder that this program is being recorded and will be available on our website later this week. And finally, I would like to thank our host sponsor, Hawkeye 360, for their support of the program. We could not deliver this type of thought leadership without their support. Here to introduce our speaker is Tony Butera, Vice President Global Growth for Hawkeye 360. Tony, over to you.
Well, good afternoon to the INSA audience, and aloha from Virginia Beach to the teammates on Oahu. I'm Tony Butera. I am the Vice President Global Growth, Hawkeye 360, a commercial RF and analytics company. It's my privilege to introduce the Indo-Pacific Director of Intelligence, Tom Henderschedt. I've known Admiral Henderschedt since 1999 when we were fellow Asian Tactical Watch Officers at then the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific. I can tell you three things about Tom, or as Admiral Aquilino likes to say, Tommy: China, China, and China. Just talking before the program started, the Admiral mentioned that his dinner conversations revolve around China. And I can tell you that he hasn't just had 2 or 3 tours. He's devoted his career to studying the Indo-Pacific. He and his family have lived overseas for more than 10 years. That's in Beijing for 3 attaché tours and a Navy liaison tour in Taiwan. He understands its politics, its demographics, and of course its military. He would shun this praise, but he's a modern day Eddie Layton. By living in a country like China, he has learned to understand the people and, most importantly, the Communist Party. I would tell you that he's probably the most cogent observer of both the PLA and its generals and admirals of anyone working in national security today. If operational experience and a deep understanding of the Asia Pacific region, in particular the People's Republic of China, doesn't motivate you, the academics are also equally on par. He's got a degree from the George Washington University and 2 master's degrees, one from the Army Command and Staff College and one from Johns Hopkins, the School of Advanced International Studies. He was the Samuel Eliot Morrison Scholar for the Navy during his time at SAIS, studying what else? China. I've worked with him closely over the years in many tours in the Indo-Pacific, but the most important thing, and the 3 things that you always leave a Tom Henderschedt call with, are his 3 questions. He asks you things like, are you getting everything you need from my team? Do you understand these developments that may be misunderstood on Oahu or maybe in DC? And finally, is there anything else I can do to support your mission? I don't know what else you could ask of a great teammate, a great naval officer, and probably the best Asia Pacific naval analyst and PRC analyst the government has to offer. I'm lucky to call him a teammate. We as a nation are grateful that he's on watch during this time. Ladies and gentlemen, Rear Admiral Tom Henderschedt.
Hey, Tony, thanks very much for that warm welcome. Just a couple of corrections. Yeah, I'm not a Leighton. I'm every day I'm learning more about what I don't know about the CCP and the PRC. And as you know, in China, at holidays, you typically exchange red envelopes full of cash. And I feel that after that introduction, I owe you a hongbao stuffed with money. You're too kind. But thank you very much for that warm introduction.
And yes, thank you, Tony, and thanks to Hawkeye. And thank you, Admiral, for joining us this afternoon. And I just wanted to set the scene a little bit with you today. The last time we heard from you was back in mid-July at the AFCEA INSA Summit in Maryland. And a lot has changed, a lot has happened since then. But along that vein, we're 10 days into the fiscal year and wanted to hear a little bit from you about what some of your priorities are for the coming year.
Yeah, great question, Suzanne. Thanks very much. So, of course, you know, as the J2, my priorities are reinforcing the commander's priorities. So defending the homeland, deterring strategic attack, deterring aggression, build a resilient joint force, and build a capability to fight and win if required. But I think that in addition to building out the J2 enterprise, as I said a bit before we went live, I think part of my obligation is not just into the enterprise, but also into the entirety of defense intelligence enterprise for the long game that faces us. So we are very focused on the PLA every day of where they are, what they're doing, how they're operating, how they're developing. But this competition, we have to be able to do near term, medium, and long term at the same time. And building depth for the defense intelligence enterprise a bench moving forward is also not just, I think, a requirement for participation from the INDOPACOM J2, but just because of my experience and my interactions with the PLA, I feel a personal drive almost to proselytize about what we are up against over the next 50 years in this relationship. So I think there's not just developing the enterprise and traditional intelligence requirements of sensing analysis, but also in how do we build a capability for analysts in the DIE who perhaps aren't even born yet. Where are we looking forward into growing significant depth, which will be required no matter what happens in the near term, but looking forward as well.
And since we last saw each other back in July, a lot has happened, as I mentioned, but I think I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about what we've seen happen with the attack on Israel and what you're seeing in China sort of as a reaction to that.
Yeah, so obviously, as Tony said, my family would be the first to argue I'm kind of a one-trick mind, that everything circles back to Beijing. And watching the horrific events unfold in southern Israel over the weekend, my initial kind of head scratch was how would the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing handle this? So over the weekend, the press conference, the MFA press conference, a lot of questions on this. I think MFA has been a bit reluctant to talk about this yet. It impacts China. There are Chinese citizens involved. There will also be calls about where some of China's partnerships have led. I think that particularly in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we're seeing a very different China than we did even five years ago, of an MFA that is, as we saw, willing to negotiate, willing to serve as an intermediary. I think that China will also see what's happening in Israel from a where will China be able to exert some interests and potentially some mediation in this. There's some surprising calls already from MFA, but I think that for us, watching where the Ministry of Foreign Affairs lands in this issue will be fascinating.
And as far as watching China, what sort of behavioral changes have you seen in the military over the past 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, I think that that's really the question of the day, and watching how rapidly the PLA has advanced some of their capabilities. When we discuss this topic, it's difficult to not look back to December of 2015, where she ordered the most significant reforms in the PLA in its history, and then watching that play forward following a significant congressional delegation visit to Taiwan last year, and how the PLA has reacted to that. And what we've seen from the PLA, particularly last year, is far larger, more complex, more joint, more integrated, more lethal exercise activity, including significant, arguably exponential centerline crossings from the People's Liberation Army Air Force, surface ship activity around Taiwan, drones operating around Taiwan, multiple missile and MRL firings following the Codel visit, and then that continues into this year with transits of President Tsai through the United States, and again Vice President Lai, and how the PLA are using those activities to not just signal but to advance warfighting capability and exercises, and largely signal where they are developing capability to compel or coerce unification as their ultimate end state. I think fundamentally we have to be careful about talking about the 2027 timeline. We all are very focused on what she has charged the force to do, but we shouldn't necessarily fall into that's a necessary go date for the PLA. I think we need to be focused on this is a be prepared to and develop capability for that date. But fundamentally, we're seeing, to your question, a far more joint and capable PLA, and we're watching that almost on a monthly basis in advancements of capability.
So that's analyzing more the near term, and then you talked a little bit more about the long term, the long game. Would you say there are any areas where we've lacked in maybe analyzing the long game because we're focused to a degree on the near term?
I don't know that I'd say that we lack in analyzing. I think I have a continuing concern about developing a bench for the DIE to look at this over a very long term. And that means being able to watch PLA activities and predict what might be happening. So I'll give you for instance, the PLA has gone from an extremely clunky organization in 2009 where they had no social media presence, no press conferences, to a PLA that is very comfortable racing to the podium to get their story out. We've seen the PLA that's becoming very, very adept in the legal space, and where they can exert legal challenges and the use of lawfare moving forward. To your point about challenges, I think what I'm hopeful for is developing a defense intelligence enterprise bench that is able to predict the next steps. In other words, where through listening to PLA dialogue, through reading media, where will the next step be? Where will the next move be in the legal space? That's where I hope to be able to move the DIE and to develop that for the medium term moving forward. Be able to develop that predictive analysis so that we're not just telling operators what has happened, but to be able to lay down markers of this is what will transpire.
And when you refer to the legal space, are you referring more externally to China than like internal legal rights of citizens?
Yeah, I'm sure that the State Department has significant interest in what's happening domestically. My focus, and when I talk about lawfare, is the CCP's whole of government application of laws or rules to deter, dissuade, or to achieve objectives favorable to the PRC, and how they do that. So whether that's in challenging maritime claims, in clouding maritime claims, and hoping for confusion from the recipient. I often think about Ensign Henderschedt on my first ship in 1993, steaming through the South China Sea and going to wardroom training on the South China Sea, and Lieutenant Bill Guerrero briefing us on what the Spratlys meant. And I had no idea 30 years ago that I would be dealing with the Spratly Islands every day, and the need for an intelligence officer to have significant understanding of what the maritime law says, particularly in Beijing, receiving demarches or protests, or helping partners understand what the objective of the PLA was. So to understand where there are very clear Chinese maritime claims and where there are others that are purposefully ambiguous, in the hope that countries will, through confusion or obfuscation, just default to awarding a territorial sea even where one is not claimed. That's just one example of how this legalism, and there is some great work going on here at INDOPACOM with our JAGs about where that lawfare is being applied. The Chinese also are quite willing to export domestic law into the international space and bring about an argument that Chinese law applies in international waters. Those are very critical issues for all of us to understand.
That's very helpful. I have a better understanding of what you were referring to. I'm sure everybody else watching knew, but I did not. So thank you for using that example. So let's move a little bit towards Taiwan. With China's President Xi Jinping ordering his military for a possible potential invasion of Taiwan by 2027, what would that look like? What kind of capabilities do we think China would bring to a fight of that nature?
Yeah, I think if I can, Suzanne, if I can just kind of nuance your wording a little bit, I think that it's really important that when we talk about the 2027 date, I think that what we should talk about is Xi, as the chairman of the Central Military Commission, telling the force to develop capability and capacity to compel unification should that occur. But then when we look at what that might look like, there's a whole range of options, with the ultimate nightmare of cross-strait invasion being the kind of the hardest, and everything down to the gray zone space that we're observing today. In the preps leading up to that. I say observing today, I think that the CCP certainly desires a unification short of kinetic activity, but is developing the capability and capacity today to be able to leverage fires should it be required. But even if we look back at some of the activities this year that were leveraged inside the Taiwan Strait. So for instance, I believe it was during the President Tsai transit when the Fujian Province Coast Guard announced that they would be stopping and searching any ship in the Taiwan Strait. The connotation, of course, is that the Taiwan Strait is not an international strait or waterway, but that the mainland exerted control over the entirety of the strait. That's another area in the gray zone where they're attempting to wear down the international status or the international space of Taiwan, and that's just one move that goes from very gray zone all the way up to high-end activity. It might include fires like we saw during the congressional delegation in August of last year, could involve blockades, could involve amphibious operations and activities, could involve action short of the main island of Taiwan to one of the outlying or distant islands, and all of the entirety of the spectrum in between to achieve the goal of unification. For Xi and for the CCP, viewing unification with Taiwan, it's largely a legacy issue and a necessity from the CCP's perspective of unification in order to achieve the Chinese dream. And until that unification occurs, in their perspective, the dream cannot be realized. But that can be anything from just significant economic coercion to where Taiwan surrenders, all the way up to an extremely violent campaign for which the PLA, I would argue, is preparing every day.
So where do you think China lacks in military readiness towards some flavor of unification?
I think that a lot of what we are observing around the world right now, and frankly, I think one of the areas that when the PLA looks at the United States or looks at our allies, our ability to execute mission command, our ability to understand commander's intent, and via mission command to be able to achieve the objective, even if various command and control nodes are excised or denied command and control. I think that's a fundamental issue for the PLA. I think it's a challenge that's not just an issue for the PLA, but it's a societal challenge for the CCP to do. In other words, when I returned from Beijing after my first tour, the Marine attaché and myself, Colonel Chad Sabraja, who went on to be a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, we wrote a paper about what we observed, kind of a myth-busting paper about what we observed in the PLA. And one of the topics we talked about was this mission command issue, where what we observed was an inability of a PLA NCO to really be empowered by a unit commander through mission command to be able to achieve commander's intent. That has not changed, and I think the PLA is attempting or hopes to negate that weakness through technology. I think there's a lot of people in the U.S. and the West that would say that that's something that technology can't solve. That's a socializing problem. I think the PLA is quite confident in the fact that warfare fundamentally to the PLA is a scientific endeavor. In the U.S. and the West, we look at warfare as more of an art than a science. Because it's a science to the PLA, they believe there's a scientific solution for the problem and are looking to leverage big data, AI, to be able to kind of recreate a technological mission command, if you will.
Yeah,
I think C2, so sorry, long-winded answer. I think C2 is one of those issues which will be challenging for the PLA.
Yeah, trust and leadership, I think, are still vital in these types of tense situations. Can you talk to our attendees a little bit about what INDOPACOM is militarily to enhance partnerships with allies to build stability in the region?
Yeah, let me first start off by saying that I think that those of us, and by the name of your organization, those of us in the intelligence business, I think we all grow up very comfortable in a Five Eyes structure. And I would say that certainly the headquarters is a Five Eyes headquarters, and the J2 Directorate is extremely comfortable in working in Five Eyes. My direction has been, hey, if I'm sending an email, it's going to be a Five Eyes email, and everything we do, with very rare exception, is Five Eyes. building partnerships with not just Five Eyes, but with regional partners at very different levels. Part of this is understanding what Beijing is up to. Part of it is for us to be able to paint a picture. We talked earlier about the gray zone or the lawfare space, for us to be able to identify where Beijing is working, and frankly where we've noted successful repudiation for Beijing's behaviors, how those activities, how some of those activities have been successful, to be able to tee up to partners, hey, we've noticed this worked in the past, this caused some deterrent capability or some behavioral change from Beijing. Those are the types of partnerships that we are building moving forward. I think this is a whole of the region issue. Every partner has a very different perspective of what they can do or what they can't do. But for us to try to set a level information playing field, which is largely not even a challenging intel proposition, but just kind of a factual proposition of, hey, this is what we've observed from Beijing. This is what China's domestic law says. This is what is causing their behavioral change. And oh, by the way, we've noted that your neighbor has done X, and it has succeeded in causing behavioral change from Beijing in this space. Those are the types of partnerships that we're building every day. Recently, all the intel chiefs of the Indo-Pacific got together. We talk and share our common concerns, our common problems, and how we can work together to get after many of these issues. So I think that the partnerships are alive and well. Some of them are very, very visible, as you would guess. Five Eyes partnership, our long-standing partnership with Japan, our partnership with Australia, our partnership with the Republic of Korea. Others are not as public, but are critically important in the region.
So we also have the global partners you refer to, some in which you can talk about, and others which might surprise some of us. But there's also other government partners. And back, I think it was last month, Dave Frederick, the Assistant Deputy Director of the China Strategy Center at NSA, mentioned some collaboration between INDOPACOM and the NSA. And then also, second to that is also Space Force, I believe, has some folks assigned now to INDOPACOM, maybe for a little over a year. Could you talk a little bit about NSA and then Space Force?
Yeah, so as you could guess, our partnership with NSA and Cybercom is absolutely critical. Dave is a great battle buddy and partner. This is becoming an issue that's it's no longer just a regional issue. As you said, it's a worldwide issue with worldwide challenges. So significant partnership and growing, even growing, I would suggest, by the month with NSA and Cybercom. I think to your other point on Space Force, so in November of 2022, Space Force activated and assigned U.S. Space Forces to IndoPACOM. That continues to grow. Similarly, growing our relationship with Space Forces on the intelligence side, understanding that space domain is extremely complicated but critical in this issue, where it's no surprise to anyone, the PRC continues to develop and enjoy significant ISR capabilities in space, for which having a partner like General Master at Space Force is critical for not just the command, but for the J2 intelligence enterprise to get after this problem set. So I guess to short answer is we are partnering with everybody. And it's not just, frankly, it's not just an intel to intel partnership. There are intel to policy partnerships going on. There are times when we are asked to help partners understand what is happening through an intelligence lens, and that request is not just in the Indo-Pacific region, it's worldwide of, hey, Tom, can you help this partner understand what gray zone means and what we might be expecting in future gray zone activities from the CCP. So lots of partnerships.
Great. Well, I have quite a few audience questions, and then I have a whole other sheet of my own. So I'm going to kind of move back and forth here. But in reference to partnerships, industry is also a partner. And Jennifer Krischer with GDIT asks, what, if any, technology would you bring to bear against any challenges that INDOPACOM may have in regard to China or other global hotspots?
I think the answer there I would give is AI and ML abilities to work at a scale and speed and scope which is required in this problem set. So, we are, Tony gave a warm introduction, and I'm surprised returning how in some cases there's not much that's changed in the way we process data from when Tony and I were young junior officers till now, when now is the time when we really need technology to be able to help, to be able to, in some cases, take the human being not out of the loop, but put them on the loop and have machines and data be able to highlight areas where a human being needs to have a look. So whether that's in imagery or SIGINT or any skill, to leverage the ability that technology will bring us as this issue becomes more and more complicated and moves faster and faster. That's where I would ask for the biggest help.
So I have a question here from Jen Kim from Voice of America's Korean service. Jen asked, I'm curious about Indo-Pacific Command's intelligence priorities for North Korea. What is on your priority list?
Well, Jen, as you know, there's a very robust intel presence at the United States Forces Korea. Our priorities are working with our partners at USFK J2. As a matter of fact, I talked to General Gorski, my counterpart, I think it was Friday evening. So we are sharing priorities. We are backstopping USFK J2. General Gorski's priorities are my priorities. I think that as we look at INDOPACOM and our perspective of the peninsula is the battle space surrounding the peninsula. I'm interested in what the reaction of the region is to Korean activities, North Korean activities, missile launches, provocations, how Moscow, Beijing, how everyone views those activities. But could not have a better partner in this than USFK J2.
That is encouraging. So here's a question from an attendee, and we have not discussed this yet either today or previously, but what are the prospects for South China Sea nations, Vietnam, Philippines, reaching a mutual agreement on maritime exclusive economic zones, thus challenging PRC claims more directly?
This is the ultimate desire to have the INDOPACOM J2 go on record and guess the future. I think that I'm always more comfortable to talk about red than to talk about kind of the blue and green activities. I think what I'd say to this question is how Beijing looks at the problem. And as I think many of the viewers know, in any of the conversations with Southeast Asian nations, with South China Sea claimants, Beijing is extremely uncomfortable in having conversations with everyone simultaneously at the table. Beijing much prefers to bilaterally engage and to I don't want to say not allow, but I think to dissuade or to not participate in a group conversation and sees strength to Beijing, benefit to Beijing of dealing with each claimancy separate and sees power from that. So I think to the question of what's the future look like for resolving exclusive economic zone claims, I think that's going to be difficult without claimant states doing that holistically. If it's just bilaterally between Beijing's disputed claim of the entirety of the 9- or 10- line and all the way down into the deep South China Sea, it's going to be extremely challenging for any of the claimant states to resolve their disputes on exclusive economic zones.
So going back to one of the questions, and I know this has been asked of you probably many times, but as time marches on, the answer may evolve a little bit. But what are the lessons learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine that can be applied to China and Taiwan today?
Well, I think, let me just back up to say that, you know, I was in Beijing for the invasion, and I was quite surprised at how quickly the topic of the invasion became a point of conversation, not just with the PLA, but by the PLA to the entirety of the attaché corps in Beijing. And I think the PLA, I would credit the PLA of the 21st century as being very much a learning organization, which does not take a lot of time to spiral in lessons learned. I think that one of the issues that concerns the PLA is fundamentally the PLA of the 70s and 80s is an outgrowth of the Soviet system. Obviously, they grew in very different directions. The PLA command and control today is not the same as the Russians experienced, but I think that seeing what happened frankly, in the ability, as we talked about earlier, of mission command with the Russians, I think that concerns the PLA a little bit based on how they see their natural kind of birth or natural similarity, at least originally, to a Soviet-based system. I think economically, China is concerned about what has been leveraged against Russia in response to their illegal invasion of the Ukraine. But fundamentally, I think the PLA is looking at Ukraine to kind of learn or relearn what they see as undisputable facets of modern warfare. $30 years and the complete role reversals that we've seen in the last 2 years of Russia, China, and seeing the, Tony alluded to this a bit. To me, the historical context of the U.S.-China military relationship is fascinating, and there are issues in the relationship that are known to every senior officer in the PLA, but are not necessarily very well versed on the U.S. side in much of the history. But remembering the history of the Sino-Soviet split and what happened when Russia and China diverged, and for us, hopefully many people on the net today know about the Zhenbao incident between Russia and China in the 60s, where there were people killed, there were artillery exchanges on the border, where the Russian supremacy in the bilateral relationship was very, very noteworthy. And today we see a very, very different relationship. So even in the, I spent the last 6 years in Beijing, and even watching some of the requests from the Chinese to the Russians for what they wanted to exercise and where the Russians were unwilling to exercise, and preserving some of that capability that they would not share. I think a lot of that, particularly in the political signaling space, is gone now, where the Russians owe the Chinese such that I don't know that there's much that's off the table anymore. So I think that watching the future or predicting the future on this issue, I don't know. But what I am comfortable with is that both countries are in a very different position, and Russia is incurring debts to the Chinese that will be very difficult, if not impossible, to pay off in the near term. And I don't mean necessarily monetary debts so much as policy debts of areas of exercise, areas of potentially technological exchange, training exchange, where I think that's where the real question lies. How Taiwan figures in Russian policy for the Far East, I'm not quite sure. I'm sure there are people in both Moscow and Beijing talking about it, but I don't really know right now.
Okay, this is a question that I don't want it to be my last question. Often it is, and to me, it's probably the question I should have led with. But we talked a little bit about in the beginning, near term versus the long term game, and so I think this really plays into recruitment and retention when you're particularly talking about the long game. And so what are some of the things that are steps that INDOPACOM is taking to improve, enhance workforce recruitment and retention?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. It's challenging. Hawaii is expensive. It's a long way from many people's homes. But really, this is the nexus of at least the military competitive space. One of the really superb programs is a partnership between US IndoPACOM, J2, and the University of Hawaii in building an intelligence studies program which grows students, and believe it or not, not even starting in college, but starting before college. Growing students who already live on the island are eager to be here and potentially see a future in some type of a job in national security. If they come to work at the IndoPACOM JIAC, that's fantastic. If they decide to work at another government agency, terrific. But our partnership with University of Hawaii is really superb in growing people with a perspective of, hey, maybe I don't want to join the military, but I do want to serve my country in another way. I'm interested in the intelligence business. I'll take a couple courses, and then we offer, let's say, a good path to employment on the backside of that program. It's not my brainchild. Those that preceded me created, but I think it's only growing in importance and success.
That is so encouraging to learn about. I hope we have some potential students and folks tuning in today, as we usually do. So I have time for one question. I know folks that are running this behind the scenes are mad at me, but this is a question from an attendee, and the attendee wants to know if you could wave a magic wand and deprive PLA forces of a single capability or weapons system, which one would you choose and why? And this might require a crystal ball and a magic wand, which we do not expect you to be equipped with either of those tools.
Yeah, that's a question I frequently get, and I frequently attempt to sidestep. There's a lot of capabilities that are absolutely fascinating from the PRC's perspective. I think that if I had the magic wand, what I'd really use it to do is to try to change the perspective, or let me say reinforce the perspective that this is not unnecessary. You know, the fight is not necessary. That the U.S. fundamentally has not changed our policies. We still adhere to the Taiwan Relations Act. 3 communiques, the 6 assurances. We are not encouraging Taiwan independence, so that all of this rhetoric and frankly all of the 2027 is not the necessary. Remember that when we talk about 2027, it's framed by Xi as the centenary goal of the PLA. The PLA was founded in 1927, and the centenary goal is interpreted as the ultimate resolution of the most significant boundary dispute of the CCP, and that is the return, from the PRC's perspective, return or the unification of Taiwan. We don't accept the return, of course, but if I had a magic wand, I think I'd best use it in that space. Thank you.
Well, I am not a SME on the PRC or INDOPACOM, but as a parent, and if I had a magic wand, mine would be TikTok. So I will close my insights with that. But really appreciate your candor this afternoon in joining us for this conversation, as I know our attendees did. And also just want to give a shout out to Hawkeye C360 and Tony for sponsoring today's discussion. Thank our attendees for joining us. I want to mention that there's a survey that's going to pop up on your screen when this is over. Admiral, you're welcome to fill the survey out as well. We have a couple events coming up. We have a conversation on tradecraft and data on Friday. It's a virtual conversation that includes Randy Nixon from CIA, as well as a guest, Ryan Long from McDonald's Global Head of Intelligence and Executive Protection. And then on November 7th, we will have John Sherman, the CIO of DOD, join us for a leadership dinner and a moderated conversation. And the Achievement Awards with Charlie Allen, the Achievement Awards nominations are open for 2 more weeks. Go on our website and nominate a future leader of the intelligence and national security community. And thanks again for joining us this afternoon. If you want to forward this conversation along to friends, it will be available on our website by the end of the week. Thanks again.